Hi, this is Lori Rehfeldt with God, Aliens, and a Cup of Coffee. And I am here today with Candice Sanderson, who wrote the book, and it's in her background, but here you can see it. This is her book, The Reluctant Messenger. And aren't we all reluctant messengers? Sometimes it's like, why did I have to see or hear what I heard? But I know I got to do something with it because it's very, very important. And I'm on a journey I didn't realize I was on. I thought I was going to go to the store and buy something, but instead, God or someone from the universe decided to speak to me. And I just find it so fascinating because I believe it's happening to quite a few people out there in this universe here. And so welcome, Candice. Do you go by Candice or Candy?
Well, either one.
Okay.
I'm known professionally by Candice, and the older I get, it just seems like Candy is like maybe not professional. I'm
Okay.
really kind of kidding, but I have a twin sister, and we were nicknamed Cookie and Candy when we were very little.
Oh,
So I know how sweet. But many
yeah.
years ago, I had my name legally changed to Candace. Most people call me Candy, but that's because they knew me. They know my
Ah,
twin
okay.
sister, Cookie and Candy. And she does not go by Cookie. You know, she hasn't gone by Cookie in
Oh,
many, many
wow.
years. She goes by her birth name, Diana. And
Okay.
my birth name was Dina. And I never liked that name because it wasn't me. I was always Candy. But
Wow.
I
Oh,
love the name Dina now, but it's like too late. I can't go back and change it again.
oh, it's so funny. Yeah, yeah. It's so funny. Growing up, my father used to call my sister Debbie, and I'm like, Debbie, because her middle name was Deborah, but her first name was Christine. And everybody who knew Christine called her Christine, except me. I call her Chris, or called her Chris. So it's just interesting how my sister Donna, who I'm hoping we can do a part two with this, she calls my youngest sister Colleen, she calls her Molly. So she called her Molly,
Why
my
does
brother
she
called her
why did
Molly.
she call her Molly? Is Molly part of her name or was that just a
No,
nickname?
it just kind of happened. It could have been the name game song. I don't know. It was Molly, Molly, Bobali, Banana, Fana,
Banana
Fopali,
fan of faux Polly.
Fee, Fi, Mo, Molly. Yeah. So, yeah. But anyway, and then when I was working in the South, people, they would say their name and they would say, oh, well, that's really my middle name. And I'm like, darn, my mom never called me by my middle name, only when she was mad. She'd say,
Exactly.
Lori
Right.
Ellen, get
When
in here.
you
And
know,
I'd be
I,
like,
I'm from
who, me?
I'm
So
from the South also, and when your full name is used, it usually means you're in trouble, doesn't
that's
it?
right. That's right. Trouble. So, Candace, could you sometimes it's easier, I think, if you share a little bit about yourself in regard to um how you how you got on this journey to be a reluctant messenger. What were you doing before the journey?
Okay.
And
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we've already started with my name. You know,
that's
what is
right.
it? Is it Dina? Is it Candy? Is it Candace? But that's how we define ourselves is by what our name is.
Hmm.
The way I defined myself before I got on this journey was through my training. And my training, Lori, was as a psychologist. So,
Yeah.
as a psychologist, I trusted and I believed with my entire heart that the world that I lived in, I could define by my physical senses.
Hmm.
If I could not see, hear, taste, feel, or touch something, it did not exist. If I could not measure it with my physical senses, that meant it was either a figment of my imagination
Hmm.
or it was wishful thinking. Or as a psychologist, maybe it was pathology. Maybe someone was hallucinating. So that's my life. I led a very practical, a very, very pragmatic, actually boring kind of life
Oh,
until one day, and this was August 28th, 2013. I am driving to work early one morning. It's 6 o'clock or so. Sun's not even out yet. I have a very short drive to work, 10 or 12 minutes, and I'm paying attention to the road, but my car's actually almost on autopilot because there's no traffic. And I'm thinking about, oh, I've got all these meetings coming up and what am I going to do and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, I start getting messages from out of nowhere, just out of the blue. My first thought was, what is this? I mean, it was actually a beautiful message. It was a message, and I knew it didn't come from me because it was like almost poetic. And I thought, this is not from Candice. But it was a message about a flower. And they said, and I'm using air quotes here because said is not the correct word, because I did not hear it like a hallucination. I did not hear words, but the words came into my awareness with such specificity. It was as if I heard them. I knew exactly what was being said. But it was this gorgeous message about a flower. And it said that a plant, reaches down through Mother Earth. It's grounded, and then it ascends toward Father Sky. Now, I didn't use words like Father Sky, but anyway, it said when this plant is in perfect alignment with Source, and I knew the word source was capitalized, then it produces a flower. And that a flower is a flower. So in my mind's eye, I saw the word flower and I saw it hyphenated, that it is a flower of energy.
oh.
And then the message said that humans too, and Lori, I didn't talk like that. I don't call people humans. It's like people.
Mm-hmm.
But humans too, if they are in perfect alignment, if they're grounded in perfect alignment with Source or their goals or whatever, then they too can be these flowers of energy. And the whole world is just open to them.
Wow.
Well, my first thought was, not from me. I am not poetic. And this was beautiful. It was just so gorgeous the way it was presented to me. But that was a real key sign for me that these weren't my words. This was not my language. I don't know who it was from. And the first thing that I did as a psychologist is questioned it. I start going through the DSM-4, which is like the diagnostic manual that we would use to diagnose people if they had any kind of mental condition. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, okay, psychosis. And I'm going through that list in my mind, and I
Mm-hmm.
thought, no, I'm oriented to time, place, and person. I'm not psychotic. I don't know what this is. So let's just forget about it. So I thought, well, just put that aside. And I just drove to work. Well, when I got to work just a few minutes later, that parking lot's pretty empty. I get there, I grab my bags, and I start walking toward the side entrance of the building where my office is. And all of a sudden, I see this beautiful royal poinciana tree. Now, for those listeners who are not familiar with the poinciana, it's a subtropical tree. It's beautiful. It's wide spreading. It has this gorgeous canopy.
Mm-hmm.
The leaves almost look like ferns. They're just real lacy.
Oh,
And it
nice.
produces this gorgeous flower. The poinciana I was looking at was this beautiful, brilliant, like a reddish orange color. Now, I've passed this tree 100 times. This is just a tree right where I work. But Lori, it was different. This tree called to me. It was only later that I realized, oh my goodness, this is like the first mystical experience of my life. And I just looked at that tree the sun was just starting to come up. And as it did, there was like a mist on the ground. Light started filtering through these beautiful leaves.
Mhm.
And I looked on the ground, and there is this gorgeous pattern of shadow and light, just like dancing on the ground. And I had this realization that this tree was as much alive as I was. And time stood still. To this day, I cannot tell you whether I was there for 2 minutes or 2 hours. I was just frozen in this beautiful space. And then all of a sudden, my eyes, it's like someone took my head and said, look at this. My eyes went toward this beautiful bud that had not yet opened. And then everything that I had just heard on my trip about the flower, and when it's in perfect alignment, that plant produces this flower of energy. All of that came back to me. And I realized that wasn't nonsense. This event I was having with the tree only reinforced that whatever that was, it was significant. And I knew that I represented that flower, that bud that had not yet opened. And it wasn't just me, it was all of us. So if we stay grounded, and if we have a goal and we're connected to God or source or whatever that greater part of us is, then we too can flow and produce a flower. We can produce our very best. I then went inside the building, not knowing how my life would change from this. I didn't know if this was a one-time event or whether it would happen time and time again, which is exactly what happened. Time and time again, it continued.
It kind of reminds me of you being set up in a way of field of dreams. If you build it, they will come, and you get the sense of, well, I don't know why, but I got to build it, and it's important. And if I don't do it, then I'm going to feel I'm feeling as if I'm going to lose a piece of myself, or what you mentioned with the flower, my flower is going to start to wilt a little bit, and I need to keep nourishing it so that it continues to grow. And what's interesting too is that when you talk about being a psychologist and you talk about the way the brain works and the way the synapses and whatnot, and you think, well, is this psychosis? Is this what, all the different thoughts that you were, as a professional, going through. I find it really interesting that no one takes into account that maybe we're actually kind of split a little bit. That what about our soul? Our soul is where the flower is growing. The soul is what's reaching out, resonating, and it's through love, through,
Yes.
and I know that my sister Donna had something similar going on, and hers was coming out through an incident of she owned a limo business, and she's driving a limo. She gets a phone call to find out that her son is in a coma because he had a drug overdose, and everyone was upset, freaking out, and Donna's first she's really beside herself, but she's driving a person right now at that point to one of the big airports in New York. And she all of a sudden she had a voice, and it was calm, and it said to her, he's going to be okay. He's going to be okay. It's just pretty much just listen to me. And so when she got to the hospital where he was, everyone was crying and whatnot, and she was the one that was looking at everyone to say, no, he's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
Wow.
And of course, her husband was worried to think, are you going through something, a psychosis or whatever, are you losing your mind? And she said, no, no, no. And in her case, she said, I talked to God. God was talking to me, actually. I didn't have that connection until that moment. It was, for her, it was an awakening, which I think is a
Mhm.
really wonderful way of being. And I believe that happened. I could only guess the year it happened in, but um, it's been about, let me see, probably since 2016, 17, somewhere in there, when she started going through this, and her son is able to function. I think he's been going for his degree. He's really has his, it's a gift that he's got his life together. It's a miracle. It is. I mean, nothing. I mean, the doctors were even trying to. He was an organ donor and trying to get his organs, and they're like, no, 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 we're not ready for that yet. That kind of thing. But she's been on that journey
Wow.
since, and that's why I really want to do a part two with you, because I think
Oh,
she and
listen,
you. It's a
we
really
have we have to do a part two. As
absolutely.
I heard you tell that story, I got cold chills all
Mhm.
over. And cold chills have always been one of those indicators that when it happens, I need to pay attention, because
Yeah.
whatever is occurring when I get the chills, that person or what I'm seeing represents the truth with the capital T.
Wow.
What
Yeah.
happened with your sister is something that I guess you don't really know until you've been there.
Mm-hmm.
When I stepped into that space where I was getting messages, and well, the drive to work, I didn't really believe it. And, they had to like rap on my head and say, pay attention. And that's why they showed me the tree. But I stepped into such a beautiful, timeless space of divinity
Mm-hmm.
and of love.
Yeah.
And when things like that occur, I don't care what anyone tells you, well, it's just this, it's just that.
Mm-hmm.
You know that you have stepped into a very special space, and the
Yeah.
information that comes to you is truth. She heard God's voice that said, He's
Yeah.
okay. He's going to be okay. And she didn't have to trust it,
Mm-hmm.
because when you're in that space, you know it. You know it to be true.
Yeah. I
Wow.
actually had um it came to me when you started talking about that space. I remember a dear friend of mine, Laura Kavanaugh, she passed away suddenly. She ended up having a grand mal seizure. And I just felt compelled that I needed to go to her funeral, and I needed to get up and say a few words about her. And I was in the library looking for something to help me to do this. And I ended up finding the book, The Five People You Meet in Heaven, by the guy
Yes.
Abrams, I think his last name. And I but I had it together, and I walk up, everyone said a few things, people were, I mean, not everybody, the people that were brave enough to get up to say a few things. They said, oh, yeah, Laura was a great person and all this. And I got up and I immediately looked out to everybody, and I said, and I showed them the papers in my hands. I said, I know I got a lot here, but I said, please bear with me. And as soon as I started going through it and sharing my story and just reading what I had written down, I felt like I was in a tunnel. And it was like the whole tunnel was, I had to get through what I was saying. And in fact, a few times I started to cry. and get emotional. And I had to stay in this tunnel. It was like I felt like I was in a connection with the realm that Laura was now in and where I was. And I couldn't even really, being in this realm, it's like my tunnel vision. I didn't really see the people, but I knew um it was just so incredibly intoxicating. And but I just knew that I had to be in there, and the energy that was flowing through me, it was just, it was love. But this
Yes.
love, by the time I got done, it was like a big sigh, like whew, as if I just ran 26 miles, 100 miles an hour. I mean, and I
Right.
sat down and I was like wiped out, and people like putting their hands on my shoulder, say, "Oh, that was so beautiful. You did that. That was so, amazing." And I'm thinking, where did that come from?
Mm.
I mean, it's like it's almost as if someone else kind of guided me, because it knew
Yes.
that I wanted to share something very important about what a beautiful, wonderful human being Laura is and was, and still is. And yeah, it was just, yeah.
And you were being guided, and you actually felt it at the time. You're talking about you're in this, like, this tunnel. Well, we hear people talk about the light at the end of the tunnel,
Hmm.
but part of what that tunnel is, and this is information I'm just getting right now,
Hmm.
it's like it's a cocoon, okay? So you were nestled in this protective energy that connected you to the other side. And the protections that you had were from your dear friend. They were also from angels and guides. And this is what happens when we can step outside the physical, outside of our five physical senses, and we step into a field of energy. And in that field of energy, we start to realize that we are all connected.
Yeah.
There's no Candace versus Lori. We're all the same. We all are connected. And once you come back to that field, from that field to the 3D world that we have to live in,
Hmm.
you've changed. And people will recognize that. They might literally want to come and touch you because it's like, I want some of what she has. But there's a recognition
Hmm.
beyond most people's awareness that you have been somewhere and you have tapped into true wisdom that you can't get from reading a book.
Hmm.
And you change when you're in those fields. I mean, I dare say that your sister changed when she heard that voice that says, your son's going to be okay.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
knew, she
Yeah.
knew things that she had no way of knowing, but she knew them to be true, and they were. So when we learn to step outside of the physical, we can start tapping into that wisdom. Now, one question I've had for years since I started channeling was, you know, why me? I'm a
Hmm.
psychologist. Why not come to someone who has studied religion, or who's, wanted to, commune with angels, but why me? And one of my friends, I ended up doing we ended up being friends, but I did an interview with her, Donna Rebido, and she has a podcast. But her guide said, "Oh, we need to do a YouTube channel." So I actually have a YouTube channel called The Reluctant Messenger Unleashed. And we have like 24, 25 episodes where we go through my entire first book and we unleash it. But Donna told me, she said, Candice, you were the perfect candidate. Because you were a psychologist, you didn't jump on board and say, oh, I believe all of this. This is great. It's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But nor did you say, oh, this is the devil's work. Stay away from it.
Mm-hmm.
That my training, and I never thought about it this way, but it allowed me to be that objective observer. And messages started coming in. They started off with people who had passed away. And instead of freaking out or being excited, I just documented. I found that the way the messengers first came to me was that early morning commute. I got to the point where I would pick up my iPhone every morning. I'd get in my car, buckle up. I would hit record, and the messages would just flow. And if I made a mistake, I would hear, and again, not with my ears, strike that.
Mm-hmm.
And they would give me the correct wording. They would tell me, just like dictation, when to start a new paragraph. How to, if there was a word that I didn't understand, they would show me how to spell it, and I would spell it correctly. But after a while, I had pages and pages of documentation. Every night I would come home and I would transcribe, the messages I would get. And again, I wasn't judging them. But then I started researching, and the information that they gave me, so much of it I could verify. Like, for example, I met someone named Quan Yin. Well, I grew up as a Southern Baptist in Western Kentucky. I'd never heard of Quan Yin. I was shocked when I looked her up and found out that she existed. She's like the Mother Mary in Catholics, the
Mm-hmm.
counterpart in the Buddhist religion. Lori, I'd never heard of her. But me being brand new to this field and not really interested in it did make me an ideal candidate. It made me reluctant. I didn't just believe everything I received, but it allowed me to research, study, and then it's like, oh my gosh, all this information that I'm getting, there were so many things that I could validate. And I realized this is true
Yeah.
information. I mean, again, true with the capital T. And I didn't want to write a book, but the messenger said, when you write your book, and I'm saying,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, what do you mean when? And they said, you're going to write a book, but we'll be there to help you. And they did. And I thanked them for it.
Yeah.
But it was just something that I found myself didn't even step into, I kind of slipped into, totally unaware, but it has changed my life. And it's made me see that there is so much more to life than what I was living. It's
Oh,
not, life
absolutely.
is not
Yeah.
just the physical senses, it's being able to step beyond that through an open heart.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just see this beauty that's all around you.
Absolutely. I'd like to share another quick story to piggyback on what you're saying. Is that there was a woman I had met. I used to sell insurance in Roanoke, Virginia, so I'm familiar with this with the South, and we would actually go door to door. I mean, we were just, they taught us how to do it and whatnot, and I really found it interesting because I always met really, really amazing people, and so I I knock on this door. The first time this happens, I knock on this door, and then I notice there's a note on the door saying, "Please go around the back." So I went around the back. I knocked on the door, and the woman said, "Come on in," but she was somewhere in the house. So I walk in the house, and this woman she's elderly. She's probably in her 80s, but she's in her reclining chair, but she's having difficulty getting up and doing things. And I looked at her, and all of a sudden it's like I had a shift in my brain that said, the voice inside of me said, Lori, you're not here for what you think you're here for. Just go with the flow. And so I looked at her and I said, is there anything I can do for you? And oh, by the way, my name is Lori. And she said, could you make me a sandwich, please? So I went into her kitchen, and I made her a sandwich, and I brought it into her with a drink, and sat down. And at that point, I noticed in my head um, that it was as if I could tell you exactly where they were standing. It was a 7, 8 foot angel was standing over her, and I recognized, and I didn't really say anything to her, but we were talking, and the conversation was very, very sweet, and then when I left there, I felt like I went through another like vortex again. It's like the warm air met up with the outside air. It's like if you're maybe in a spaceship and you go out, and the air is completely different, and they shut the door tight. So I just kind of chalked it up. And then a few weeks later, I'm doing my thing, but this time I'm in a building where it's a lot of Section 8 people live, and I always love to see if I can help people that need help. I mean, so I'm walking down this hallway, and a woman comes out of one of the rooms and said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you. My mom needs life insurance." So I walked down, and I don't think in my head like, "Oh, good, I'm going to maybe write some life insurance policy right now." So I walk into the room, and I see the woman. She is now in her bedroom. The atmosphere in the bedroom was like a blanket that wrapped around anything or anyone that was in it. And I sat down. Now I felt the courage. I felt the room was really crowded, and there were about 4 or 5 angels in the room at this time. And I sat down next to her, next to the bed, and I said, "Are there 4 angels at the foot of your bed?" And she had this serene smile that said, "Yeah." And I said, "I thought so." And we just talked. I held her hand, and then before I left, I kissed her on top of the head, and and I think I probably told her, I love you. You're such a sweet woman." And I left the room thinking, what just happened, Then the third time this happened, just to give you an idea, it was a woman I met about a year earlier, and she had learned she had cancer. And I went over about a year later, because I don't want to bother people, you got to know. But I'm driving down the road, and I said, I think I got to visit so and so. So I head over to her house. I can't even remember where she lived. So at one point, I passed this one house, and they actually have a dead deer hanging from a tree, which is really weird. But I knew that her house was across the street from it. So I finally knocked on the door, and as soon as I knocked on the door, this woman came to the door. And of course, now I don't even really remember what the woman even looked like. I thought she had dark hair or whatever. So the woman said, "Oh, come on in." I said, "Oh, okay, so how are you doing?" And I'm trying to act, like we know each other because we met briefly. And then she realized that she thought I was somebody else. And "Oh, I know, you want to talk to Anne. Well, she's coming around the corner." And so she comes around the corner, and now, I mean, she needs people to help her get into her chair. I mean, she was like the woman in that Section 8 apartment. She because she died about 2-3 days later. So this woman, I knew, something was going on. I knew she wasn't where she needed to be. And I also knew that at that point, I said, "I know there are angels in this room, and I am going to figure out where you are, because I can feel where your location is." And I did. And I said, "Okay, I know you're over there to the right." And then she sat down, and her husband sat directly in front of her. And I can't believe I was watching this, and I was thinking to myself, to the universe and to God, I was like, "Okay, you've got me here. I'm the only person in this room that doesn't belong here, but I'm here. And then it dawned on me that she was so upset that she was dying that she didn't want to leave, and she felt like she was letting her husband down. I could feel her pain, I could feel it, and it was palpable. And so he walked up. He said he had to go take a shower, so he got up. So it was that point where I said, I better take this chair because something's telling me that my time is of the essence. So I sat down and I reached for her hand and I said, I don't know if you remember me. And she had a serene smile and she said, yes, I remember you. And I held her hand, and most of the rest of the communication was through her hands and through my hands. And it was saying that, he's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. It's seamless. When he needs you, you'll be there. And I was just trying to tell her that it doesn't end just because when you leave your body, it doesn't end. And we were holding hands really, really, we were like really, 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 really tight. And then at that point, he came in the room and said, he goes, I'm so sorry. I kind of remember you, but we're so busy right now. And I looked up, I totally understand. I totally understand. I just want you all to have a wonderful day and know that you both are in my heart. And I walked out, and it was a fall day. I walked out, and the cold air hit me. And again, I felt like I'd just gone through another vortex. It was, it was just interesting that anytime I go through these experiences, it's like you mentioned, in a cocoon. And, it doesn't happen often, but it was starting to get more regular as, time went on. And I'm kind of wondering, too, if a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're empathetic, that we're intuitive, that in some cases there are things that we accept because it's got to be real. It's got to fit in somehow. But I was really, really fascinated about the angels.
What I find interesting, well, there's a lot I find interesting about your story, but one thing you talk about is feeling that atmospheric difference.
Mm-hmm.
Now, since my opening to spirit, I have realized that a lot of what I've experienced, it's beautiful and it's great, but it's not as woo-woo as I thought.
Mm-hmm.
I have now learned to really see the world through the lens of energy. In fact, my first book, The Reluctant Messenger, I start off and I dedicate, I put a quote in there from Tesla, who says, Nikola Tesla, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequencies, and vibrations.
Mm-hmm.
So as we step outside of our physical bodies, our senses become much larger than what they were. And we can engage in something that's called synesthesia, where the senses actually blend. But with you, Lori, you automatically sensed that and realized that and knew that you were crossing into another dimensional space.
Mm-hmm.
Once you do that, and it's like, oh, all of a sudden, I feel like I've hit this wall, this barricade, this veil that separates me from another aspect, whether it's another dimension, whether it's stepping into where angels are, but you've hit a spot that is going to allow you to step more into more of who you really are.
Mm-hmm.
And you've done that, you recognize it. One thing that's kind of cool about that, though, is once you've done that, once you've made a connection, and not even the wonderful stories you're talking about, but let's say, like my husband died when he had just turned 35, and, it just devastated me. But I see him all the time now. But one of the first times I met with him was in a dream right after he passed.
Mm.
And that's where a lot of people will make a connection, because when you're dreaming, your ego is shut down. So you don't have your ego judging and saying, this can't happen. This is just wishful thinking.
Mm-hmm.
No, you just go with the flow. But once you've made that connection, whether it's in the dream state or whether it's you on an insurance call, the messengers tell me you can go back and do that again. Once you connect, there is an electromagnetic marker that is laid down,
Mm-hmm.
and you can find that again. It's like, if you're in a field of snow and you walk one way, you can see where you've been. You just follow your footsteps back to where your body is. And that's important, because if people are starting to do this, it's like, oh, well, what if I can't find my body? Well, of course you can. You just turn around and come back. But the more you connect to that other side, and again, it may begin in the dream state, the deeper that channel becomes.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you're able to use your senses differently, and you start to recognize these extraordinary spaces. The other dimension isn't really out there or far away, or the other side isn't, beyond the stars. Mm-hmm. It's right next to us. We are in our dense physical body, so we don't pay attention to it because we don't know how. Mm-hmm. But once we learn that we can step through the heart, we can step outside of this, we start realizing that we are more than our physical bodies. And in doing so, we can make these extraordinary connections, to angels, to guides, to people who have passed before. And we become, we start gaining a skill set.
Absolutely.
You could probably now, you could even set an intention. You're out on a walk one day, and then you can ask for that other dimensional space, or where do I need to go today? What should I be doing? And allow guidance just to carry you on those emotional vibrations and frequencies to where you need to go. Then you feel that barrier, that veil, and you can choose to step into it, and then your whole world will just expand. You can see what your stories, they're marvelous, they're wonderful. That's great.
Yeah. I just think this is, for me, it's been something that's been happening ever since I was a teeny tiny little girl. It's just, been with me. And in some cases, there have been many times where I've tried to suppress it. That's why when I saw your book, I said, I have got to meet this woman.
I'm so glad that you do. In fact, I think we first met on Twitter when we started connecting, but
yes,
so many people are like you, Lori, because they've grown up with this, and they've always had these abilities and this skill set, but not me. I was so far from it. I was always interested in those kind of things, but I didn't have any kind of skills whatsoever. And then all of a sudden, I was just on this precipice, and I just tumbled and fell into it. And my life has changed so much. And I love it. I've just stepped into more of whom I really am, but it's just great. But I already lost my train of thought here. But what I was going to say is, you came into this world with some of those skills, and we all do, actually. But the training knocked mine out of it, and I never believed it whatsoever. So I've always wondered, why someone like me? Why would I open up? And I do understand, Donna Rebideau helped me understand. My training as a psychologist actually helped with that. But those veils between the dimensions are thinning. And what the messengers have told me is that Earth is also going through a transition to higher vibrational frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
And as our dear planet makes her transition, she's bringing us along with her. So, what that means practically are people like me who were totally grounded in the earth plane. Now, I've been able to step across those barriers at will and see the larger picture. So these things are opening for more and more people, which is a beautiful thing to happen.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It was funny is I remember the first time, one of the first times that I experienced something that was really kind of interesting was when I was at a time of my life that in 1978 I enlisted in the United States Air Force and went into a career field that probably only 2% of the women were in the career field. So if you have 100 men, you got 2 women, that kind of thing. And it wasn't fun. It was really, really upsetting. And what happened with me is that I tried so hard to at least come across as logical and pragmatic and see things black and white. But while that was going on, I'm at RAF Bentwaters in the most haunted county in the world, and I'm dealing with there's this crazed monster trying to come out of this pond that I couldn't see the pond until I got Google Maps about 40 years later. That was trying to scare me, and then one day, and I can't tell anybody about these things, and then another time I'm experiencing I'm in a weapons storage area. It was non-nuclear, and because women weren't allowed to guard anything more than couldn't guard nuclear bombs. And so I'm in this other area by myself, middle of the night, really, really cold out. I got this little gate shack. I've got my M16 rifle on my shoulder, and I'm heading out to check all the doors on these bunkers. And I get I probably take about 30, 40 steps away from my gate shack when all of a sudden I see a flash in my head, and it was this tall, dark, praying mantis. It was I guess I call it a mantid, pacing back and forth and telling me, don't go. That's all it said. That's all he said, don't go. I made an about face, went right back to my gate shack because I did not want to have to walk up to him, and I just didn't have that wherewithal. And I think they knew. He knew that I was scared, that he knew my sensitivity level and whatnot. But apparently, I really believe that the atmosphere knew that I was receptive, like I was an antenna to all of it. It knew it, and I was trying my best to be black and white, pragmatic. If you can't touch it, taste it, feel it, uh, smell it, listen to it, see it with your eyes. But and then I saw the UFO that flew over the base, and for me it was in February 1980, and I had to report it. This is not, it's an unknown aircraft. I had to report it. It flew low. It flew about 20, 30 feet off the ground, and it was big. And then it broke into 3 pieces, and then it shot up in the sky. And I didn't want to report it because, again, I'm trying to everything's black and white. If it didn't land, I can't have any proof that I saw it, except the fact that I wasn't by myself. And that, unfortunately, that's just the way it was then, and it still is now, that, when you, are put into a position that you have to report something that you really don't want to report because of the way people who are black and white, pragmatic, well, I don't know, what have you been smoking or drinking or whatnot, and it's I mean, it was disheartening in many, many ways. It took me a long, long, long time to even talk about it and to get it out. But there were times when that energy that we were talking about was not a benevolent energy. It was like, it's like, okay, it was an energy that didn't want me there, and I'm thinking, well, fine, I'm counting my days down. I'll be away from England before I know it, and it was just, but sadly, I loved England. And when I was off the base, I felt peace. That again, that vortex thing, as soon as I went onto the base, I was wrapped into something that was not a good energy. And then when I left the base, it washed off me. It was as if that was my reprieve, is when I was able to live off base and go home and live among a community of people,
Right.
as opposed to living in the dormitories.
I have a question for you. That praying mantis type creature that you saw that said, "Don't come here, don't go there."
Uh-huh.
Could that have been protecting you from going, or was that I mean, I don't know. Could there have been a protective quality where that entity is saying, "Don't,
I think
more
he
for
didn't,
you"?
yeah, he didn't want me to he was pacing and thinking about something really hard. It was as if he didn't want me to interrupt him. It was more or less, but it wasn't like a scary mean, like, don't go, get out. It wasn't anything like that. It was more or less of a really, don't go because you don't want to see me. I mean, that was part of it. Don't go. It's like, and it wasn't like I cared that I don't want to scare you. It wasn't anything to do with that. It was more or less, don't go. You just be disrupting my thought process of what was going on. And I do think that he was above ground level. I think that there was something underneath the ground. They had just recently upgraded that area, so I just think that he needed to be away from whoever was down there under the base underneath or whatever to say. And I'm guessing because I don't know if there's a base under there. I don't have my shovel, but I just felt it was he was up on top, and I guess he just didn't expect, maybe he didn't expect me to really do my job in the middle of the night. I don't know, but
Right. And he probably didn't expect that you could see him, because you've already told me that you have some additional skills that many of us do not have.
yeah.
I dare say other people had been there while this creature was there, and they probably did not see him.
Mm-hmm.
So he
Mm-hmm.
probably didn't expect not so much that your presence would be there, but that your presence observed him, could
Mm-hmm.
actually see him.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And this is all interestingly, this area that I was working was right beside. I mean, on the other side of the fence was Rendlesham Forest, where a lot of where the big UFO sighting was seen in December of 80. My UFO sighting was seen in the same location, except it flew over the base in February of 1980. So there, I've been trying to tell people for decades now that there's definitely more to the story that meets the, everyone still has it that it happened in 3-4 days in December, when in actuality it happened even before that. But sometimes it's like Lori wants to get her story out too, that kind of thing. But I I find what you're going through, the reluctant messenger, I'm probably more in line for that than I am with UFOs. It's more or less the fact that it's these entities that want me to be aware of them, and I think they can clearly know that I'm sensitive enough to pick up their frequencies and their, you know, when you walk in a
Right.
place and oh, it's a good vibe, good vibrations, and then
And
you go into a
that's
place.
so true
Mhm,
because it is all energy vibrations. And there will be people that I'll talk to that they've read my books and it's like, oh, I don't really believe all that energy stuff.
mhm,
But think about it. That's our radar that we've had for our entire lives. We don't always pay attention to it.
mhm,
But you can ask anyone if you walk into a room and there are two people sitting there, just sitting, but they've just had an argument, you can feel it. And I'm not talking about their body language or they look angry, but
mhm.
no, just walking in the room,
Yep.
you can feel the density, you can feel the anger, you can feel the discord
Yeah.
because they've just had an argument. You can leave the room, come back, and even if they're gone, there's still an imprint there
Hmm.
because their energy is still there.
Yeah. I
We
was,
know,
yeah, I was just
sorry,
going to mention that I worked at the U.S. Department of Education after I got off of active duty, and I went to the regional office in San Francisco, and I just walked through the doors, and I could feel how toxic the energy was. And I did talk to some people, and I found out, yeah, it was really, I couldn't wait to get out of there because it was horrible. I don't know how people could it, how they were able to function there. The other place that I felt that, and this is interesting, is the U.S. Department of Agriculture building in D.C. because I was applying for a job there. But as soon as I walked through that door, and I really think it has to do with um, the way farmers, the way agriculture treats animals, and I picked up on the agony and the cruelty, and I'm thinking, I'm
right,
like, I can't work here. I can't,
right.
I
Well,
really.
and that's great because what you're doing is you're leading with your heart. Your
Mhm.
heart is telling you stay away from this and you're
Yeah.
paying attention to it. But
Mhm.
because once we realize everything is energy, and that's why we have these feelings, when you walk in, or the opposite is true. You meet someone you've never met before, and all of a sudden you feel like they're like a long lost friend. That's the energy too. But
Yeah.
once we realize we're all energy, we can then use that to our advantage. I retired a few years ago as a psychologist, and in my last job, I was a clinical psychologist, but I was working in a school setting also as a school psychologist.
Mhm.
And anytime, Lori, they would want me in a meeting, that was never a good thing because it meant there was a problem.
Mhm.
Either a student had a problem with the teacher, or a teacher had a problem with the parent, or whatever it is. There was always a problem. And by the time I got to a meeting with me, the psychologist, tensions were high. So this is what I would do. Now, I had already opened, but I couldn't tell people that. But
Mhm.
I would use the skills that the messengers were sharing with me. I would go into the meeting room beforehand and I would just like clear the room with energy. I just would use my heart and send
Mhm.
out positive energy. As each person came in and sat down, I would look them straight in the eyes, shake their hand, I would smile, introduce myself.
Mhm.
As I did that, I intentionally sent energy from my heart to their heart.
Wow.
So, from an observer perspective, and for those who can see energy, you see a table, people are surrounding the table, and there's my heart energy going out to each one of them. And as a parent might be sharing and they're tearful or they're angry, I would just push more and more love and energy toward them. By the end of the majority of the meetings, people were happy, they were smiling. We would resolve the issues. Now, from one perspective, that's what I always did. You know, I would meet with people, we would have a positive outcome. That's great. But now I had the skill set where I could actually use my energy and call in my angels and guides and have them help by calling in the other person's angels and guides so that we all could literally rise above the situation, bring in higher vibrational frequencies, not the frequencies of being depressed or being angry, but of love and trying to find a resolution. And things worked out so much easier and better. But this is something we can all do once we realize there's some sort of negative feeling that we're getting. We can protect ourselves by building a bubble of energy around us. We can rise above it and call in divinity, divine help, angels, guides, and we can help manipulate that energy so that everybody is on a higher wavelength.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. You know, we're going to have to do a part 2. I think you are an incredible guest, but more importantly, I've just made a new friend, and I so appreciate you. And
Oh, thank you. I feel the same way. That's wonderful.
it's like I feel love. and we've got a lot more to talk about, and I so appreciate that you gave me the opportunity to share my stories that really piggyback on what you're talking about. And I know when Donna comes on, because she's at the point now where she can actually, I got a video of it. She had all these orbs going.
You have no idea what door you're opening when you start talking about orbs. I will have to share with you some of my orb photography. I've asked before to have I was taking a picture of a friend and I said, ask for an orb to come and land in your hand. And there's a picture of the orb in her hand. I've got a picture of a 3-foot orb when I asked for it to come in. So this is going to be so much fun. I can't wait.
Yeah. It's gonna be fun because Donna, you know, and most of us are who are even have been experiencing it for a while. You know, it's like getting a gift that you have to practice, or you know, there's a little bit of a learning curve, and but I will definitely share that orb experience, that video with you, and I probably will include it on this particular podcast to tell everybody, yeah, this is what we're going to be talking about next, and it's going to be pretty wild. But anyway, well, I thank you again, and this is God, Aliens, and a Cup of Coffee, even though I've been drinking my Diet Coke, and I look forward to our conversation again. And let me just go ahead and stop this.